the topic, very interesting, something we came up with. It's both universally applicable, but also, I think, unique to talk about ego defenses. We'll define that against narcissism as weapons against it. And it's probably going to be something you don't on the surface expect, because by calling it weapons, it sounds hostile or aggressive. And that's what narcissism is. So they don't tend to be hostile and aggressive. I'll just launch right in to say that they tend to be mature and calm and placid, but wise and effective. So that's my little intro. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think, when you have an integrated ego, meaning you're able to take the input from your id, your animalistic, unconscious, desire for pleasure, and you're able to take in input from the superego or your learned moral components. You've really you can react with better defense mechanisms. I mean, from my understanding, a defense mechanism is anything that the ego deploys to help you cope, meaning that conscious part to help you cope with incoming anxieties, with any troublesome friction that could overload that capacity to cope. What do you think?
I think I want to thank some of the people coming in.
Yes.
Yeah, including upholding the first.
Yes, he's great.
So thank you for being here. That's really cool. Not up his alley or her alley, but that's okay. You would find that it is up your alley because it's universally applicable, these ideas. So, what is an ego defense? Yeah, you're right. It's supposedly about anxiety, but
Yes.
I see them as universal, standardized human social habits,
Love
social
that.
habits that are universal. And I think, interestingly, up until maybe the recent year or couple years, considered the only way to measure a person's maturity level, which these days, I just, gave a lecture 2 days ago about how personality disorders today, the nomenclature is wrong. They used to be called character disorders, and that was
Yeah.
more correct because character is about moral development, or more importantly, psychological maturity, let's say, character maturity. And ego defenses are all about levels of character maturity or maturity in general. Today, that might be called emotional intelligence to kind of make it vanilla, soften the blow. We all have maturing to do. Me, Jeremy, everybody. We all have growing to do. We're not monks on a mountaintop who found nirvana already. Make sense? So ego
100%.
defenses measure that accurately and uniformly throughout the human species. We all are born primitive and have growing to do as babies, toddlers, and beyond. And we start with age appropriate primitive ego defenses. And you've all heard of those. The most primitive of all is deemed to be denial. So everybody in the world has heard of being in denial. It's a feature of substance abuse. It's a huge feature of narcissism. It's Shakespeare's Richard III is in complete denial when he says, a horse, my kingdom for a
Kingdom for a
horse.
horse. Yeah.
If I had a horse, I could maybe win. No. So the ultimate Shakespearean narcissist. So denial, projection, projective identification, splitting also is quite primitive. And you see all these, everybody wants to know about personality disorders, the way they call them today,
Yeah.
especially narcissistic personality disorder and perhaps borderline personality disorder. So people with borderline, which are 85% female, 15% male, and antisocial personality disorder, which is the reverse, 85% male, 15% female. Both of these tend to use a lot of denial. That's the core as an ego defense. Splitting, meaning they pit you against your friends, and all of a sudden you're enemies with your own friends. And how did that happen? And it was caused by this drama filled person that came into the picture. Um, so splitting, denial, projection is huge. So you're happy, you're enjoying your day. All of a sudden, somebody walks in the room, the borderline, the narcissist, and they say, "Why are you so angry? You seem angry. Why are you so angry?" And they repeat that enough times, you start to feel a little annoyed and then angry. And then you
Mhm.
started out with a good day and you were happy, and all of a sudden you're angry and you're like, "Wait a minute. Where did that come from? I have no reason to be angry." Oh, it came from that person. They were projecting their anger onto you for you to process for them, like a baby needs a mother to help them process. See, so it's primitive. So the four levels of ego defenses, George Vaillant established these, and Freud began it. Anna Freud, his daughter, continued it. George Vaillant later established four levels: primitive, immature, neurotic, which most of us are because we don't have our lives fully worked out yet. 70% of people I've heard. And then mature. The mature ego defenses are amazing. They are your weapons against narcissism. We'll list them. They're the most numerous of all, and they happen to be exactly the same as all of the ancient philosophers' virtues that they established. When they talked of virtue, like Aristotle had all these various human virtues, things to pursue to be what the ancient philosophers called a good person. There are two big questions. The ancient philosophers, I'm being overly simplistic, but consider this. Um, they pursued, who am I and why am I here on
Mhm.
earth? And they also pursued, what is goodness and what makes a person good? Meaning beneficent, kind, loving, wise, mature. In other words, character maturity. What is goodness? And they listed all these possible targets to aim for as you are a growing human. Those actually happen to be Valence mature ego defenses. Originally, you only heard of these, like five of them that were common. Altruism, obviously, you know, charitable nature. Humor may be surprising. Humor is a high virtue. Um, Suppression, meaning I can't solve this today. Maybe I will tomorrow or next week, but I can't do it today. So I'm going to table it. Let's table things. That's another one. And then there are numerous others that actually link the ancient philosophers to one of the most modern new theories of psychology you've heard of, called positive psychology. Really, what
Right,
positive psychology is all about is a list of the ancient Aristotelian virtues, like
right,
courage, tolerance, temperance, even mindedness, um, acceptance, patience, all which are what? All the features of being as adult as you could be. Those are the mature virtues. And those same virtues that are not hostile or aggressive or greedy or selfish, they're beneficent and generous, but also strong and firm and wise. So if you are faced with a narcissist, this has happened to me many times, and I'm sure to you too. Somebody being very rude to you in public in a social scenario, and they're kind of baiting you to get into an argument, maybe an argument about politics or religion or who knows.
right,
And they want to see if they can get, quote, under your skin, your boundary, one of the three pillars of high virtue and maturity of character are boundaries. They're trying to get under your skin. That's your boundary. It's not your real skin, it's your boundary. And they
right,
say something about Trump, or they say something about Biden, or they talk about the new Iran war or the riots, or they try to get under your skin. And you're tempted to respond with, "You idiot, what are you talking about? I don't care about that stuff." But instead, you respond with tolerance, and you just fall silent and listen. Patience, you wait for them to finish their bizarre rant. And finally, you respond with some sort of neutrality. Like, yeah, that's really, I'm not really into that.
Yeah.
And you diffuse the situation using mature ego defenses. It's almost like a parent with a toddler. And there's no insult intended by that. It's the truth. It's
Yeah.
somebody behaving immaturely with immature or even primitive ego defenses who is interacting with somebody who's more mature, who uses maybe neurotic level, most of us, neurotic level defenses like intellectualization,
Sure.
turning a highly charged emotional argument into an exercise in data. You see that in journalists all the time and podcasters. But if you want to strive for the highest of the high character, you learn what the names of the mature ego defenses are, which are the same as the positive psychology goals, which are the same as the Aristotelian virtues. So that's my little speech.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like where you're going with that. I would say in ego state psychology terms, which I know ego state or inner child therapy is one that you and I both said is helpful for men. I think calling it ego state therapy helps if there's some pushback, understandably so, against going to something called inner child. Like, I understand that's not for everybody, but really, when someone is acting out, okay, through being impulsive or disruptive or being argumentative verbally, which by the way is an immature defense. And
Or
you, as the
splitting,
recipient, yeah, or splitting,
splitting,
yeah,
which
splitting.
which
You're all
the
bad.
narcissistic abuse people like calling triangulation,
Yeah,
splitting.
yes. If
Yeah.
someone's splitting you, you can choose to say, I'm not going to take on the imagined slights that they see or faults that this person is labeling me to have. Wait a minute, they're describing someone else's character or they're building a false me out of misconceptions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some breaths and recognize I don't identify with that. That's not what I intended, what they're saying about me. Clearly there's some hurt there and I'm being mischaracterized and then having my identity thrown back at me in a way that I'm not going to choose to allow myself to inhabit or to think about. So a good example is someone who is splitting another person and bringing up like, well, you always fail at this and you're just like your father. And you can choose to say, well, wait a minute. Look at all the things I've done that are my own. Look at who I am identity wise. I'm not going to allow myself to start consciously dwelling on and getting back into the memory network of my own shame. And I'm going to say, okay, it's valid to have emotions. Step one, step two. Do I have to think about that right now? And I know getting onto the Stoic train, because we're talking about the wisdom of the Greeks. So, and Stoicism, like, is a through line through Greek and Roman thought. Getting into Stoicism, is it a true thought that you're having at that point? Is it helpful? Probably not either. So maybe there's a kernel of truth, of maybe you've had a tendency toward anger, but have worked through it, whatever. But allowing someone to frame you, because frame is a very popular term now, allowing someone else to take the frame of your identity and spit it back at you and the kernel of shame from your own past enlivening that memory network is something that we can choose to stop, to say, I'm not going to engage that conversation, or maybe we can talk about this later. That certainly wasn't my intent, what you're explaining to me now. And I would prefer to not have my past or family thrown back at me. Because when we talk about splitting, someone who's very good at it can usually weave a web where they throw back at the person whatever that person's perceived faults are. And by the way, that's why it's so damaging in couples therapy or in any
Yeah,
kind
well,
of
and that's
therapy.
projection.
Oh, yeah.
So that now they've added, I mean, talk about weapons that are hostile instead of
Yes.
mature and parental. They're using not just splitting, but then peppering you with projection,
Right.
right? When you argue back and then they say, no, no, that's what makes you wrong, or that's what makes you
Sure.
an idiot. And they call you names and pejoratives and things like this. I mean, they just add aggressive weapon to aggressive weapon. So the
Well,
more primitive the ego defenses, the more immature the ego defenses, the more hostile and aggressive and truly weapon like they are in a
yeah.
dark sense.
Well, and
But the
there's
weapons of maturity are light.
yes.
They are goodness, light, and wisdom
Well,
in
I love
nature.
that. Goodness, light, and wisdom. So one thing I'll add before I got to hop off. This is a lot of fun. In our society now, there's so much talk about baggage and about other people needing to defeat your baggage. Well, that's saying that other people need to defeat your own transference, right? Like, I'm going to
Yeah,
transfer onto you my past dating experiences. And if you don't live up to my if you
correcting
don't
them,
defeat all of
healing them.
those, right, which hey, if corrective emotional experience can be a part of dating and a part of relationships, but you have to
Sure.
do your part to not see ambiguous signals as utter red flags and cut people off immediately. So
And
that
while
would be
love
my
heals, it needs to be voluntary.
yes.
You know,
So
you don't go using others to heal yourself through love.
right, it's got to be
You
mutual.
both, yeah, it's mutual.
It's not
Yeah.
therapy. Love is
Right.
not therapy. It can be therapeutic, but it cannot be
Yeah.
a one person focusing only
Yeah.
on the other. That is why therapy is so sacred and why therapists need to make sure they're focused on the client because it's not a friendship. It can be friendly, it can be very mutually respectful, but it's
Yes.
very different than a friendship or romance because you have to keep a focus on the client. And it's the exact opposite with romance. You have to both be filling one another's cups and feeding one another emotionally and nourishing. And so that's I love this. We could do a part 2 on it.
Well, this is a quick talk, and before we end, let me just say one more thing. You can go and look up all the Aristotelian virtues: patience, tolerance, humor, beneficence, generosity, etc. And you can look to Martin Seligman and the positive psychologists because they have the same lists of positive human traits, mature traits. But what if you wanted to know the mechanics? And I'll say this quickly before we go. If you wanted to know the underlying mechanics that would enable you to master all of these weapons against narcissism, all of these traits of maturity, of high character, the mature ego defenses, they would have three pillars. I will list them right now and we'll be done. Number one, ego, observing ego, which is also called mindfulness. So being present, self aware, and therefore ready to learn, willing to learn by observing yourself and others is pillar number one. Number two out of three, personal boundaries. There's all kinds of anatomy to them, complexity to them. We teach you about this. Learning to grow out of your boundaries by learning to say no to others and say no to yourself, which is self discipline, and to reject the idea of suffering. Suffering is burning energy and time and money on the uncontrollable. Stop suffering. That's good boundaries. Pillar number three of three is John Nash's game theory, the Nash equilibrium of no matter how you're treating me, if you're being a bully, being a narcissist, being a juvenile little toddler, I'm still going to be win-win in my behavior. Maybe it's big win for me, little win for you, but it's going to be win-win. I'm going to try for that which is harmony, goodness, light, wisdom, and is win-win in nature, not win-lose. Meaning, I choose more to be happy than to be right.
Mm,
You're choosing to have to be right over your own happiness. I'm going to choose, let's try for everybody to be as happy as they can. And I can be wrong if you need me to be wrong. Win
yeah,
win. That's the third pillar. Three pillars: how to master all the mature ego defenses. Good observing ego or mindfulness. Number two, good boundaries. Number three, be win win with people, even if they're a bully.
love it. Yes, the
All
boundaries will
right.
help with that. All right, this rocks. We'll
All right.
record
Yeah,
something else very soon.
you got it. It's been great. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Dr. P.